Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you most kindly for joining us. Tonight, we examine the growing dispute over the true scale of the hunger crisis in Nigeria. While the Tinubu administration dismisses claims of a severe food crisis, insisting the situation is overstated, fresh data shows that over 26 million Nigerians are facing food insecurity, unsure about where their next meal is coming from. And according to the UNICEF, 16 million of those are children. Well, tonight we break down the numbers, the concerns, and assess the realities and explore possible solutions. Joining us for tonight's conversation is Dr. Godwin Atser. He is the country director of Sasakawa Africa Association Nigeria and a professor in agricultural extension and rural development. Prof, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Right, let's start this way. What is your understanding of the situation Nigeria is dealing with right now?
Yes, when you look at the situation that we have at hand right now in terms of food insecurity, it's a bit complicated, and we must accept that fact that we have a problem at hand. And this is because those drivers that are creating food insecurity shouldn't be actually politicized. There are some factors that are beyond politics. It is not political. If you look at the challenge that we have today, we have issues around climate change. And nobody can tell you that he is not aware of that. Farmers today don't know when to plant and when to harvest, when the floods are going to come, when you're going to have the breaks. So we are in August and we're having rains. There's no August break. And all of these are affecting food supply, the food chain. If you talk about the crisis that we're having today, the farmer header clashes that we're having, these are things that were not there in the 2000s. If you just take a look back in the recent past, you see that we are not there. But today we have insecurity. So all of these are affecting food supply. We must also know that as a nation, our population growth rate is actually higher than our agricultural growth rate. So definitely there is a challenge in terms of the kind of food that Nigerians need to have. And that's, if you put these factors together, we can say that we have a challenge that we need to address. No denying that fact at all.
And when you consider the politics of the conversation, do you think that is also a part of the problem? Because it looks like across the spectrum, one side is trying to paint a bleak picture that tells a very disturbing story about how severe the situation is. And you have the government on the other side trying to say, listen, it's not as bad as these other people are trying to make it, whether it's people in the media or organizations like UNICEF and others who have been in the country assessing some of this situation. Do you think the political narrative itself is also part of the problem?
Yes, when you look at the issues around data has been something that has been controversial and even debated, even within the research circles. There are some data that when we see, we actually question those data. And I think the government also has the right to actually question some of this data that are being produced. To what extent were they validated by the government, by the different agencies? That is one part of the story. But then the most important thing that we have to look at is that if we have one Nigerian going to bed hungry, it should be a source of concern, because food security is a right of every Nigerian. No Nigerian should go to bed hungry, and that we can't take away.
And talk to me about what the pattern is showing. If we could just display this graphic that talks about, the situation in Nigeria, on the continent as a region, and how it is not necessarily something that is quite isolated to Nigeria, but of course the population size itself makes the situation a rather stark one because of how many people are involved, right? At some point in time, a couple of years ago, Nigeria was like the poverty capital of the world, something that we didn't necessarily appreciate. But tell us what the pattern is saying about the severity of the situation. I mean, the Buhari administration has had to deal with 2 recessions, dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic. So some of those were globally recognized parameters, for instance, that gave birth to a severe situation. But what is the current pattern telling us about whether things are getting better or whether they're getting worse?
Yes, so when you look at the data, now let's go back to the data again a bit. If you look at the data, if you see where we were coming from in 2024, for instance, where you had the food inflation reaching up to 40% by June or so, June, July, during that period. And you compare that with what we have today, which is around 22%, you can say that, yes, we have made progress in terms of trying to address the issues that we have, at hand. But what that means is that, yes, progress has been made, but then we need to actually accelerate our efforts. This time around, as a people, as a nation, government needs to actually redouble its efforts. Because when you look at how much Nigerians are even spending in terms of what they are paying for food, it's quite enormous. If you look at the bag of rice, if you look at the bag of beans, vis-a-vis what a family of 4 is spending on that is much. So we need to see how we can make food available. And while government efforts are being appreciated, we need to remind the government that more needs to be done.
Right. And we look at this particular map, Prof, if you can just make a comment on it, the one that captures the entire continent itself. As we did point out, there are some international patterns and trends that speaks to why Nigeria is in the current situation it's in. So all those areas in white are where this particular data was not necessarily assessed. So the white areas does not necessarily mean that there are no concerns there. It just means that there is not enough data that can allow this particular report to make conclusive statements. So those areas in the yellow indicate stress areas where, the acute food insecurity is stressed. The one in orange is food crisis, basically. And the one in red is talking about emergency situations. If you zoom a little bit on Nigeria, you see that the northeastern part of the country and the northwestern part of the country are some of the hardest hit because they are the ones in orange. And the other parts of the country is pretty much in yellow, with exception of the south, I believe, and parts of the southwest where there's not enough data to assess the food crisis in those areas. But given what we're seeing right now with the color coding, you can tell that a significant part of the country is largely affected, isn't it?
No, that's true. And what we are seeing here, clearly reflects and points to the fact that the factors that are affecting food production needs to be tackled more. On one side, we can see that the kind of insecurity that we are dealing with is actually one of the factors that is making farmers not to go back to farm. We do appreciate our military for the job they are doing, but I think we still need to see how we can address the level of food insecurity in those areas. Years back, we know that the Northeast was here. We are getting a lot of grains, like the beans that we are coming from Borno State, Yobe, and all that. You know, if you ever been to if you been to places like Portisco, they were places that were major food hubs. But at some point we saw the insurgency and all that had led to the displacement of people in that region. And then the similar trend is now happening in the northwest now, where we are seeing similar situation like what is happening or what was happening in the northeast. So all of these point to the fact that we need to see how we can bring the security situation, bring normalcy to those areas, which is very, very key for farmers to go back to farm. That is one. Secondly, which we are not talking about, is the issue of climate change. Climate change is also a major factor that is affecting these two regions. Now, what we are seeing in Nigeria today, if you observe critically, we are now having a serious issues, around heat. Not just drought now, but heat, meaning that our researchers need to do a lot of work in terms of breeding varieties of crops that are heat tolerant. Now, if you look at the agricultural productivity around even the beds that are orange, means that we need to, put more efforts to see how we increase our productivity per unit area.
Right.
So these are some of the things that this data, they are pointing to us. But again, one of the things that we need to always recognize is that, do we have a government that is responding to those? I think, to me, I can say yes. The government is doing, its best to see that some of these issues are tackled. Today we are talking about regenerative agriculture. Today we are talking about soil health in the Ministry of Agriculture, and donors, Sasakawa and its partners, we are coming together to sit down with the government to see how we can actually address food production, not just the productivity, but also the soil.
Right.
So these are things that are coming in place, and I think giving it some time with the trend that we are seeing in the reduction of the food inflation, things are definitely going to take to shape.
Right. Well, considering that agriculture is one of those high-performing sectors in the Nigerian economy, and we do know that the northern part of the country is the agricultural hub of the country, where the food is produced, right? Whether it's from north central upwards to the northwest to the northeast, that's where you get your grains and every other produce that majority of the country depends on, whether it's in the north or it's in the southern part of the country. And there is virtually no part of the north, for instance, that is not dealing with a significant security threat, whether it's in the north central, the northwest, or in the northeast. Talk to me about what that in itself means in terms of the correlation between the insecurity and the production that has been greatly diminished.
I think the issues around food, issues around security in the north is a source of concern to every Nigerian as we speak today. Recently, we had what happened in Benue State, for instance, where people were sleeping and they were just burnt. And then we, hear about some of the things that happen in Katsina, for instance. Zamfara is there and all that. So I think the level of insecurity, why government efforts in dealing with this is commendable if you look at the previous government vis-a-vis what this government is, has done in terms of dealing with insecurity. I think we need to give them credit for that. But you see, one of the other thing that is happening is that by the day, more challenges are evolving, So this is something that we believe that the subnationals need to actually join efforts with the federal government.
Would you say, Prof, that the challenges are spreading faster than the solution?
I think one of the things that we need to do is that, yes, in some states, for instance, that is the subnationals, they have actually taken some steps to actually invest in agriculture. And when you invest in agriculture, the beauty of it is that people are engaged, and then you pull them from that idleness, and then you empower them to actually be gainfully employed. So that tendency of going into criminality is reduced, right? And we have seen that in some states like Kano State. We have seen the investment that Kano State has made in agriculture. If you look at Kano State vis-a-vis stability, it has been quite, commendable, because we don't have those kind of violence that we have in other states. And we call on other states to actually emulate what Kano is doing, for instance. I think most of the subnationals need to invest in agriculture so that they can get the communities, the young people engaged. We are missing this critical opportunity, which is getting the young people, converting their energies into productive use. And unless we begin to invest in agriculture, things might not be okay for us as a people.
All right. Let's go back to the graphic and take a look at other data that spotlights the Nigerian challenge and the challenge on the region, so we can understand what is actually playing out, right? Because zooming out, you understand that there are a couple of other issues involved. So a table that compares the Nigerian situation and what is happening on the regional level, right? So when you talk about people facing hunger in West Africa and Central Africa, to give some context, you're talking about some 55 million people back in 2024. Now across the region in West Africa and Central Africa, that number has come down to around 52 to 52.7 million by mid-2025. In Nigeria, however, the number is at around 30.6 million. That is the latest figure, right? It was around 33 million or so. So you might say people facing hunger, the number has come down slightly, marginally, by some 3 million. What about the share of the region's hunger? Well, West and Central Africa represents over half of the regional acute insecurity. And guess what? Because of Nigeria's population, Nigeria has the highest number of the region's share of people facing hunger. And emergency level hunger is, well, something that tells you about the level, the degree to which the severity is being dealt with. 3.4 million by mid-2025, and the northeastern part of Nigeria is heavily affected, and the cases continue to rise. Some of the points that Prof raised earlier, of course, is around insecurity and displacement issues. Of course, the humanitarian crisis continues to develop as a result of the insecurity question. So let's talk about key drivers. Obviously, there is a common denominator: conflict, climate shocks, inflation, weak food systems. That is the regional dynamic. What about Nigeria? Same drivers plus insurgency, and some of those issues continue to shape the challenges that Nigeria continues to face. So it's safe to say that Nigeria is not necessarily a special case, Prof, in dealing with this one. But considering how Nigeria is a leader across this region, a lot seems to me depends on Nigeria. If Nigeria gets it right in terms of dealing with this obvious challenge, maybe the dynamic across the region would change. What is your reading of how the situation is evolving across the regions? Because Nigeria cannot solve this problem in isolation, apparently.
Yeah, definitely. I think we need more of more of a much more coordinated approach in dealing with what we are facing today. I do know that there used to be some initiatives around the Lake Chad Basin, for instance, because Nigeria cannot actually address its problems in isolation. Yes, we can share the data and we can look at the data, but then again, there are some also positives vis-a-vis what is happening in Nigeria. If you look at Nigeria today, we are still the highest producer of cassava, for instance. If you look at Nigeria today, we are the highest producer of yams today. If you look at Nigeria today, even if you talk about soybeans, we are the largest producer of soybeans. So you see that hopes aren't lost in terms of that. But then again, as I said earlier, we also have a problem, which is our population growth rate being much higher than that of the food production growth rate.
Someone once said, Prof, pardon the interruption, someone once said the same number of people that were producing, food, enough to feed Nigeria, say, 30 years ago, are almost the same number of people that we're still depending to feed 200 million people plus. Because the number, in terms of the production size in the agriculture sector, is not increasing, so to say. More people are leaving that sector because of the risks and the downside.
That is not very far from the truth, because when you look at the data in terms of the number of farmers, vis-a-vis the number of young people that are migrating to those urban areas, is quite alarming. And then if you also look at the demography of those that are in the agri space, for instance, you can see that it's more of the old people that are in agriculture. In the Southwest, I know that some young people are beginning to come into agriculture. The North is trying, but then this is in those states that don't have much of conflict. So if you look at it generally, and you look at the data that we have there, one, you are talking about a country that is about 200 million plus people. So vis-a-vis some of these other countries, so if you put that at par and look at that sheer number of people and you compare that with our progress that we have made, you will see that yes, we are making progress. But one thing that I keep emphasizing is that while we make progress, even if it's less than 1 million people or just 1,000 people are going to bed hungry, we have no justification as a people to say that we are doing that, we have reached the level of satisfaction that we need to rest on our oars. It means that we need to actually come together as a people to look at what can we do better. We have the land to actually produce food and actually export and create jobs for our people. So why is that not happening? We need to, look inwards and see how we can solve the issue of food production.
Right. And there's also the big question mark around what a solution looks like. A controversial topic that has continued to reverberate within the polity is the issue of GMOs. GM crops, genetically modified crops, seedlings have become the hot topic over the past couple of years. Most recently, the NAFDAC Director General seemed to have made a turnaround. I mean, last year she was, Professor Mojishola was saying that, listen, there are concerns around the health and safety of some of these crops on the Nigerian population. This time around, it looks like she's pivoting a little bit, saying that, regulations are put in place. So it looks like GMO might get the nod from the regulator in terms of its widespread use. What are your concerns around that? Do you think GMO is the solution? Because it allows you to scale up production, which could probably be the solution to food inflation.
Yeah, so if you look at the solutions that we need to bring in agriculture, it is not a one technology fit all. So you can say that, for instance, if you address issues around seed, for instance, you are going to transform your agriculture, because you also need to talk about processing. You need to talk about the post-harvest. How do you cut
storage
down on post-harvest, losses and all that? So GM is a science, and we know that it is a science that is highly regulated. And in countries like the United States, we have GM crops that are being used, they are being consumed, and people are not dying. In Nigeria, we have scientists, we have the institution that went through the whole route to see that these things have been certified. And I think the Nigerian government has signed that, yes, you can do GMOs in Nigeria. But the thing is, if we have GM crops, that doesn't mean that if you have bad roads, you are going to solve agriculture, because you need to think about the road network. How do you transport your crops? If you increase production, for instance, alone, that does not mean that you are going to take people out of poverty, because except you are able to address the other issues around, addressing the issues around post-harvest losses, addressing the issues around markets, addressing the issues around nutrition, so that some of the data that we are seeing, people are able to eat the food that they need to eat in order to be healthy. So why GM is a science? Yes, but it is not a silver bullet.
You don't think it will magically solve the problem?
You have to address the whole value chain.
Right, okay. You talk about nutrition, which is my next point, because we see headlines like this that talks about 16 million children facing malnutrition, and the number continues to grow. Yes, there's a lot of pushback. We're not just talking about one or two states, we're talking about multiple states across regions, right? How much of a danger is that the next generation in that huge number is facing something so severe in this stage of our life as a nation? In 2025, we're still talking about malnutrition.
Yes, malnutrition has been a problem for Nigeria, as far as I know, for the last 2-3 decades that we've been talking about it. And it is something that we need to address, because it also affects the kind of leaders that you are producing. For instance, a child that is not well fed is malnourished, will not have the brain capacity to think correctly, and that might become the next governor or the next politician that will make decisions for the country. So malnutrition is a serious concern that we need to address. And for us in Sasakawa, we put that as one of the pillars that we are actually pushing. We are, trying to let farmers see how they can consume nutritious foods, see how we can promote the use of biofortified crops, for instance. And I think this is where the Ministry of Agriculture, they need to invest also. How do we promote the production and consumption of biofortified foods? Because some of these rural folks can actually have access to fortified crops. But if we are able to actually help them to produce biofortified crops like the yellow cassava, which is over there, or the provitamin A maize that can help address, these are things that we could we could actually address as a people.
And finally, Prof, just before we go, your quick takeaways from how the government is approaching the problem and whether the scale of the solution is significant enough to address this problem. Can we avert the worst case scenario going by the current trajectory?
Yes, I think we must accept, and I think I read the government position and also the Honorable Minister's position on several topics around this. We are not saying that we don't have a challenge at hand. We must accept that. And we must also, recognize the fact that the government is working on it, but then we need to do more. We need to accelerate. And then we need to ensure that no one is left behind. All of us are in it. If we have a food secure nation, it is the best thing to all of us, and therefore the media, they have a role to play. The farmers, they have a role to play. The security people, they have a role to play to ensure that the researchers have a role, and every one of us, we have a role. If we put our efforts together as a people, I'm sure that we are going to have a food secure nation that everybody will be proud of.
Professor Atser, thank you so much for joining us on the program. I appreciate you very much for the analysis. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
All right.